From London, I'm Rochelle Travers, and this is The Standard. Starmer and Trump. It's not exactly the likeliest of duos, but could this be the beginning of an unlikely friendship? So Keir Starmer has met with the US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump for the first time. The pair were joined by Foreign Secretary David Lammy for a 2-hour dinner in New York, where he and Sir Keir had been attending the UN General Assembly this week. The meeting has sparked quite a bit of backlash though, considering what prominent Labour frontbenchers have said about Trump in the past. The Conservatives have accused the PM of hypocrisy, and senior Labour MP Emily Thornberry said the UK shouldn't pull our punches when it comes to the former president. I'm now joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Jitendra Joshi. Jit, Sir Keir Starmer has met with Donald Trump for the first time. What do we know about the meeting and how it went?
Yes, it's been an interesting one given everything that has been said by senior Labour people over the last few years about Donald Trump. Obviously now Sir Keir finds himself in a very different position than that of opposition leader. He's now Prime Minister. So he obviously felt it was important to reach out to a man who might well be the once and future president of the US after the election in November. We don't have a great deal of information on how it went because straight afterwards, Sir Keir jumped on a plane to come back to the UK after a week of high-level diplomacy at the UN General Assembly, and that's where he got the opportunity to meet Trump on the sidelines of that summit in New York. We had a vague sort of comment from the UK government source just saying that they discussed what they call the long-standing friendship between the UK and the US and the importance of building on that to have a quite a strong and enduring partnership going forward. So, we might learn more once they're back, but officially and probably unofficially, that's as far as they'll want to go for public consumption, I guess.
There has been some backlash in regards to the meeting. Why are people angry?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back really to what people, not just Sir Keir, but people especially like Foreign Secretary David Lammy, have said in the past about Donald Trump. You know, when they were in opposition, Labour leaders really didn't hold back. There was notably around the time that Trump as president was coming to visit the UK, and that drew some very strong language. David Lammy, for one, called him a racist, Ku Klux Klan and Nazi sympathiser, vowing at the time that he would join any protests against Trump. Starmer himself was a little more measured, shall we say, but interestingly, a tweet that's Keir Starmer issued in June 2019 when Boris Johnson was running to be Tory leader, that has resurfaced today thanks to some Conservative mischief-making, quite a telling retweet by some Tories who pointed out that when Trump endorsed Boris Johnson to become Tory leader in 2019, Starmer said, well, that tells you everything you need to know about what's wrong with Boris Johnson and why he isn't fit to be Prime Minister. That sort of language, as I say, is now coming back to bite Starmer on the backside a little. But, it is what it is, I suppose. People say one thing in opposition and find they have to do and say very different things once they're in office. And the point is being made even by critics of Trump today, like senior Labour MP Emily Thornberry. You might not like the man, but you do have to deal with him.
Interestingly, Foreign Secretary David Lammy was also in attendance, despite, as you mentioned, previously calling Trump racist, a dangerous clown, and a number of other things. Do you think they would be able to establish a good relationship moving forward?
Yeah, that's really interesting. How really at the end of the day, it's up to Donald Trump, isn't it? I mean, if he becomes president, Starmer, David Lammy, the rest, they're realists. They know they'll have to deal with that, whatever their private misgivings about the man and what he's said and done in the past. But it's down to Donald Trump what sort of approach he wants to take to what we all like to call the special relationship. And it was quite interesting last night. So just before their meeting, they met for 2 hours over dinner at Trump Tower. Before that, Trump said he thought Keir Starmer was, in his words, a very nice man. He says he paid credit to his election campaign and said he's very popular. I'm not sure the initial polls since the election showing quite a steep fall in Keir Starmer's popularity rating among UK voters. I'm not sure that's particularly borne out. But anyway, Trump wanted to play nice is the point.
How important is it for the UK to maintain a strong relationship with the US?
It's always been of cardinal importance. That's why they call it the special relationship. I mean, in Washington, obviously less important, given the UK's relative size. But for the UK, given its role as a sort of bridge between the US and Europe, it's always been an anchor point of UK foreign policy. And all the more so now, since Brexit, of course, because now we find ourselves slightly adrift from long-standing relationships in trade and also in diplomacy with our European allies. We still have NATO, of course, and that's really now more than ever, that's the anchor point for the UK's defence and security posture. And what's interesting and what's slightly concerning is that Donald Trump has blown very hot and mostly cold on what he thinks about NATO and what he thinks of America's role in it, what he thinks about America's future support for Ukraine, what he thinks about US alliances in places like the Asia Pacific, where we, since Brexit, have been pushing forward to try and forge new relationships. All of these things are coming together at a very pivotal point for us since Brexit. So more than ever, arguably, people in power in Whitehall need to stay close to whoever's the occupant of the White House.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up in part 2, our features and culture writer Emma Loffhagen on the cult of author Sally Rooney.
Her releases are kind of literary, cultural moments now, to the extent that we haven't really seen since Harry Potter.
The Standard Podcast will be back in just a moment. Welcome back. Sally Rooney, the most talked about author of a generation. Her much-loved novels include Conversations with Friends, Beautiful World, Where Are You? Plus, who could forget the Booker Prize long-listed and inspiration behind the widely successful BBC TV series, Normal People.
It'd be awkward if something happened with us.
No one would have to know.
Well, this week, Sally Rooney returned with her latest book, and our features and culture writer, Emma Loffhagen, has already managed to finish it. Emma joins me now to share her take on the latest novel, as well as discuss Sally Rooney's incredible success and the division she sparked amongst book lovers. Emma, you've written an article for The Standard about the Sally Rooney divide. Just explain what that is exactly.
Sally Rooney emerged on the literary scene in 2017 with her debut novel, Conversations with Friends. And it was this really fresh, really young book that had so much buzz around it. And since then, and particularly with the release of her second book, Normal People, in 2018, she has really achieved a level of literary stardom, which is sort of unprecedented. She's kind of been labelled as the first great millennial author, and she's just ubiquitous in the literary world. And her novels, she's got 4 novels now. The latest one was released on Tuesday. And so they're these incisive, really deeply relatable portrayals of millennial life, which have accrued her a really fiercely dedicated fan base of young, often female readers who sort of see their lives refracted in her work. But obviously, when someone becomes extremely successful to this level, there are obviously going to be critics. So there's this kind of incessant discourse around her, and her reputation as the voice of a generation has kind of eclipsed her novels themselves. But for other people, her prose is sort of overrated and hollow, and she's been criticised by a few journalists and critics for peddling a sort of sanctimony literature which doesn't have much depth to it. So on the one side, she's this sort of millennial oracle, she's this genius, a once-in-a-generation star. And on the other side, she's sort of fallen victim to her own success.
Give our listeners a bit of background about Sally Rooney. Where has she come from and how did she get her big break?
So Sally Rooney is a 33-year-old novelist from Dublin. And she went to Trinity College in Dublin, and she was a university debater, a very successful university debater. She was the top debater at the European Universities Debating Championships in 2013. This was all before she became a writer. And she finished her debut novel, Conversations with Friends, while she was studying for a master's in American literature. And she apparently wrote the book, which is 100,000 words, in 3 months. So this book came out when she was just 26 years old, back in 2017. She signed with Wiley agency, and the book was subject to a 7-party auction for publishing rights. So it was obviously, even before it came out, people knew that it was going to be extremely successful. And sort of since then, the roller coaster hasn't stopped. So she wrote Conversations with Friends in 2017, then Normal People came out a year later. Her third book, Beautiful World, Where Are You, came out in 2021. And Intermezzo, her latest book, came out this week.
Do you think the screen adaptations of her books have been key to her success?
Definitely the adaptation of Normal People really escalated her success. Normal People was adapted into a TV show in 2020, and it came out during the pandemic, which obviously, everyone was at home, didn't have anything to do. This amazing TV show comes out. It stars Paul Mescal as Connell and Daisy Edgar-Jones as Marianne, which was just perfect casting. And it was so incredibly successful. It won 4 Emmy Awards. It was one of the most streamed shows at the time. It just was ubiquitous, and that really projected her name across the world, really. And the book was already successful in its own right, but certainly that adaptation was instrumental in furthering her success. I think Conversations with Friends, the adaptation, was also pretty successful, but I think the reviews were more mixed for that one.
And what do we know so far about her latest novel, Intermezzo, which has just been released this week?
So Intermezzo, I actually have read it and I personally really loved it. It's slightly different to her other books in the sense that it is focused on 2 male characters. Her other books are usually divided between kind of more evenly between men and women, but this is 2 brothers, and we meet them in the wake of their dad's death. So they're kind of both struggling with grief. One of them is called Peter. He's a 32-year-old successful, high-flying Dublin lawyer, intellectual, kind of stereotypical Sally Rooney novel character. His younger brother, Ivan, is 10 years younger than him and is a professional chess player. And he's sort of awkward. He's kind of presented as a bit of a loner, just quite different to the other characters that we've seen so far in Sally Rooney's prose. And I mean, the critics have really loved this book. I think Beautiful World, Where Are You was perhaps the least well received of all of her novels. This one, I think, has blown everyone out of the water. It's very mature. I think it shows a lot of development in her writing. It's very profound. It's, I think, the saddest one of her novels so far, but the character development is really advanced. And I think it answers a lot to the criticism that she sort of only writes the same types of people, because I think this is quite a different take on that kind of Dublin intellectual setting.
Do you think Sally Rooney can sustain her success?
I mean, if the release of Intermezzo is anything to go by, definitely. I mean, we saw bookshops across the country opened early on Tuesday for the release, and there were, Sally Rooney themed breakfasts at all these bookshops, Sally Rooney tote bags. Intermezzo was in the windows of all of these bookshops. I mean, her releases are kind of literary, cultural moments now, to the extent that we haven't really seen since Harry Potter. Like, people queue up outside hours before, people are trying to find like illegal links to download the book. The fever has only grown. So I don't see why that would come to a halt anytime soon. And it looks like from the reception to Intermezzo, her writing is only developing. So I think full steam ahead. And she's also still very young, so she's got a lot of books left in her.
And that's The Standard. You can read more on the stories featured in this episode on our website, standard.co.uk. This podcast will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m.